Tonight, we journey back nearly 500 years to follow the incredible path of Álvar Núñez Cabeza de Vaca, a man who wandered across deserts, rivers, and unknown lands in the early 16th century. His tale is one of shipwrecks, survival, and strange encounters, a story whispered by history itself. So, settle in. Find the most comfortable spot, close your eyes, and let your mind drift. If you enjoy gentle journeys through the past, remember to like this video, subscribe for more bedtime history, and share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear what part of this story stayed with you. Now, take a deep breath and let's begin our voyage into the world of Álvar Núñez Cabeza de Vaca. In 1527, Álvar Núñez Cabeza de Vaca, a Spanish nobleman and experienced soldier, joined an ambitious expedition led by Pánfilo de Narváez. Their mission was to explore and claim vast new lands for Spain along the Gulf Coast of North America. They set sail from Spain with around 600 men and 5 ships, carrying dreams of gold, glory, and conquest. The journey began with high hopes, but trouble started almost immediately. Storms battered the fleet, scattering ships and forcing them to seek shelter in the Caribbean before pressing onward. Disease and hunger began to weaken the crew even before they reached Florida. By the time the expedition finally landed near Tampa Bay in 1528, they had already lost time, supplies, and several men. On land, they encountered dense swamps, relentless mosquitoes, and a humid climate that sapped their strength. Relations with the indigenous peoples quickly turned hostile, partly because of the Spanish demands for food and resources. The local terrain offered little in the way of easy hunting or farming, and soon hunger began to bite. Instead of retreating to the safety of their ships, Narváez made a fateful decision: to march inland in search of riches. Cabeza de Vaca, though skeptical, followed his orders. The men trudged for weeks through marshes and rivers, their armor rusting and their clothes in tatters. Supplies dwindled to almost nothing, and what little food they found, wild plants, roots, and occasional game, was never enough for hundreds of starving men. By the time they staggered back to the coast, exhausted and demoralized, they found that their ships were gone, separated by the tides and storms. With no way home and surrounded by an unfamiliar and hostile land, the expedition's hope for conquest was quickly turning into a desperate struggle for survival. With their ships gone and no clear way back to safety, Álvar Núñez Cabeza de Vaca and the surviving members of the Narváez expedition faced a grim choice: stay on the Florida coast and likely starve, or try to reach Spanish settlements in Mexico by sea. Lacking real ships, they began building crude rafts from timber, palm fiber, and anything they could scavenge. It took weeks of exhausting labor under the burning sun and constant threat from hostile tribes. When the rafts were finally ready, the men pushed off into the Gulf of Mexico, carrying only limited water and food. From the start, the voyage was a disaster. Storms blew them off course, currents scattered the rafts, and the men grew weak from thirst and hunger. After weeks adrift, Cabeza de Vaca's raft, along with a few others, washed ashore somewhere along the Texas coast in the fall of 1528. By then, most of the men were too weak to walk. Several died almost immediately after reaching land. The survivors were taken captive by local indigenous groups who saw little value in the starving strangers. Over the next few years, Cabeza de Vaca's life became one of constant hardship. He was enslaved by different tribes, forced to gather firewood, carry loads, and dig for edible roots. Many of the Spaniards who had landed with him perished from disease, exhaustion, or violence. He endured freezing winters without shelter, survived on meager scraps, and learned the hard lessons of life far from his homeland. It was during this period that Cabeza de Vaca began to adapt. He learned native languages, studied local customs, and slowly earned a place as a trader, moving between tribes with goods such as shells, hides, and medicinal herbs. Though still a captive, he gained more freedom of movement and began to understand that survival here would not come from force of arms, but from learning and adaptation. After years of hardship and forced labor, Álvar Núñez Cabeza de Vaca saw a chance for escape. In 1534, along with 3 other survivors, Andrés Dorantes, Alonso del Castillo, and an African slave named Estebanico, he fled captivity. They had no maps, no weapons, and no supplies beyond what they could carry. Their only hope was to head west, toward the vague promise of Spanish settlements somewhere beyond the endless plains and deserts. The journey took them across what is now Texas, northern Mexico, and the American Southwest. They traveled on foot for thousands of miles, passing through lands inhabited by dozens of different indigenous groups. At first, they were strangers and potential enemies, but Cabeza de Vaca and his companions slowly built trust through trade, diplomacy, and their growing reputation as healers. They treated wounds with herbal remedies, performed rituals they had learned from their captors, and offered blessings in the name of both Christian and native beliefs. Word of their healing powers spread ahead of them, and they were often welcomed with gifts of food and shelter. For the first time since the disaster began, they were not merely surviving, they were being sought out and respected. Yet the journey was still grueling. They crossed deserts under a burning sun, forded icy rivers, and endured constant hunger. Their clothes wore out completely, leaving them nearly naked. Some tribes offered hospitality, while others were suspicious and even hostile, forcing the 4 men to move on quickly. After 8 years of wandering, in 1536, they finally encountered a group of Spanish slave raiders near the Sinaloa River in Mexico. The reunion was bittersweet. These Spaniards were shocked to see countrymen emerge from the wilderness, but they were also in the business of capturing and exploiting the very people who had kept Cabeza de Vaca alive. Horrified by the cruelty he witnessed, Cabeza de Vaca argued for better treatment of the indigenous peoples, but his words had little effect. Eventually, he returned to Spain, carrying with him a remarkable story of endurance, adaptation, and survival against impossible odds. His written account, La Relación, remains one of history's most extraordinary first-hand survival narratives, proof that sometimes the greatest weapon is not a sword, but the ability to adapt.